We are back with another episode of the Cycle World podcast. I'm Mark Hoyer. I'm the editor-in-chief, and I'm with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor. This week's topic is favorite tools and how to use them. We've both brought a pile of tools from the shop, and I've learned something about myself, Kevin, in doing this as I grabbed my favorite tools. I really like to measure things. I have a very strong desire to know what I'm looking at or messing with. Any overall observations on your collection, or is it just?
Well, I didn't bring my vernier caliper, but the vernier caliper was measurement for me, and the most important use of that measurement was port timing. How far down from deck to the top of the exhaust port, the top of the transfers? Where is the piston when the intake port opens? And all that stuff got written down. I have all these terrible notes that will go out on the curb one day. And at the time, those were magic. And when I said to a friend of mine, do you know what wisdom is? And he said, what is wisdom? And I said, 32 down and 47 wide. And he said, oh, 750 Kawasaki. And I felt that was yes, it was a kind of arcane wisdom, which we shared.
Amazing. Yeah, well, I'll start. One of my favorites is this Mitutoyo caliper. It's the long kind. You can get down in fork tubes with it. And, just measuring all the things. And also, I have the digital dial caliper. You can lazily switch between thousandths and millimeters.
Yes.
And you can, yep. It's amazing. It's almost as good as it's incredibly accurate and it's incredibly repeatable. It's very high quality. I do like the analog. That's what's nice about this is it's just, it's millimeters and it has fractions, it has 0.0 millimeters on the little scale right here.
Sure
so no moving parts. So this one is actually X. You probably can't focus in on that, but this is X Kel Carruthers. I got this from Kel, randomly looking on Facebook Marketplace. I needed a disc sander, and I found a guy selling one, and it was Kel Carruthers. And I know Kel because Paul Carruthers, his son, was my boss at my previous job years and years ago at Cycle News, and so I'd had barbecues with Kel and Jim Allen and stuff during those days.
Yeah.
And so yeah, when we were making a deal, I got these from Kel, and they're signed, and it makes them special. And man, what a useful tool! I love the digital one. I love when you really need the nanometers, you can use your digital one. I guess related to that is I've always found myself, you just get in a situation where you're on the lathe, on the mill, or you're measuring things, doing things, and you need to know your decimal equivalents for fractions or want to. And I have this beautiful metal plate made by Draplin Design. You can look them up online, Draplin. It's metal. It's beautifully, it's just beautifully etched and gorgeous. It's made in USA. And it goes from 1/64th, which is 0.015625, all the way to 1 inch, which is 1.0, it turns out. But I keep this in the shop next to the, the drill press, the mill, and the lathe and stuff. And it's always super handy. What do you got, Kevin?
Well, the thing that I remember from my early know-nothing days with TD1B and other primitive race bikes is that you had to set the timing repeatedly because it constantly went out of time. Now today, digital ignition systems are never wrong. You don't have to set anything. It's no longer a concern. But in those days, there was a breaker cam on the end of the magneto rotor, which pushed mechanical switches open when it was time for the spark. And those crankshafts to which the rotor was attached were sort of floppy, like the surface of the ocean. Look once and look twice, and everything is different. So we were forever setting the ignition timing. Now, if we imagine this cylinder head being on a bike, here is the adapter. Screw it in to the spark plug hole. Has a cute little set screw right there to hold the dial gauge. And with the dial gauge, you could accurately know the piston position.
Nice.
And the timing specification given in the owner's book, ignition timing, it said 2.0 millimeters before top dead center. So you put this 12 millimeter wrench combination, lovely pre-modern snap-on quality, onto the rotor bolt, of which this is an example, and you could turn the rotor at will. And the wrench just stayed there obediently. Stay, and it stayed. So then you could run the piston through top dead center, zero the ring on the dial gauge, and then back it up 2 millimeters, and that is where the Okuda Koki meter should indicate. Here is the Okuda Koki meter. You connect the little alligator clips to the magneto in the appropriate places, and the swing of the needle tells you when the points are breaking. And it was a pleasure. I looked forward to it at the end of the day because I knew that I would be sitting there, squatting on the ground, facing the right-hand side of the engine, swinging that needle back and forth and making the little adjustments to get the timing right. And it was all very pleasant. And that's one of the reasons why when I pick up these tools today, they are, put it crudely, friendly friends of mine. 12 millimeters combination. It only had one job because there wasn't any more 12 millimeter on the motorcycle anywhere. Of course, that changed a few years later when 12 millimeter heads became standard on 8 millimeter bolts. There was also the business of changing gear ratios, which happened fairly often, front sprockets and rear sprockets. And bending tab washers, because when you put the 5 sprocket bolts to mount the rear sprocket, you would first put on a tab washer, which had 2 holes in it and a sort of a dog bone connecting them. You would use 3 for this assembly. Torque up the bolts. Then use this little cold chisel.
Tiny cold
to
chisel.
Get
yeah.
Yes, to get under the edge of the tab washer so that then you could, with the channel locks, pinch it up against the side of the bolt head. Now, you might think you were done. Oh, we're going to such and such another racetrack which has the same gearing as we are using today. I don't have to change the rear sprocket. That was okay with the 250, but when we got the 750, I found that when I unbent the tab washer and put the wrench on the bolt head, there was no torque. Where did it go? Well, with that 120 to 140 horsepower 750 banging on those bolts, they stretched. So you had to retorque the sprocket bolts every weekend, even if you were going to use the same gearing.
Wow.
Some people learned that the hard way.
I have to take a moment and apologize to anyone on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., because this is a visual program a little bit. We are holding up tools, and Kevin held up the cutest little cold chisel. Like, it's just lovely, like the size of a number 2 pencil with a flat edge on it. It was beautiful. So we're going to be doing that, and we'll do our best to have descriptive audio for those of you purely going on the podcast platforms. I'm gonna
Yep.
Oh yeah. Oh, I was gonna.
Yeah, launch out.
Yeah, you were talking about bolts, and one of my favorite tools is this little guy. So it's sort of like a pocket knife. It's stainless steel. It's a Starrett, and it's a thread gauge, and all these little alligator teeth guys open up, and it'll be hard to see, impossible to be in focus. But you take one of these and you hold it up the teeth of a bolt, and if it goes in perfectly, then that's what you have, and it tells you, okay, that's 19 threads per inch.
It also will fit inside of nuts. That's why it has that crank shape.
Yep. And it's a positive stop, so it goes against the back. And like I said, this is a Starrett, and this is SAE. I have a metric one. That's the wrong part of the box, but I have a metric one also. And what I need is something with British threads, which I have not found yet, because those are the ones that are truly mysterious. Because it could be cycle thread, it could be 26 threads per inch. You just never know what you're dealing with on an old Whitworth.
AMC had a thread that was unique to themselves, and it was just for rocker boxes. I never understood that one, but
somebody decided it was exactly the right thread to keep from vibrating loose, and it was going into, and it was going into a casting. And because you want coarser threads going into a casting.
Yes.
Typically, especially aluminum.
Poor old aluminum. It never forgets.
Well, you were talking about torque.
Sure.
So I'm going to get out my my Matco. This is 100 foot-pound. This is incredible. I found it incredibly useful for most things motorcycle.
Yeah.
And good quality tool. It's calibrated. We got a local person that goes up, but you can also just stick something in your vise, put it here, and hang the pounds on the handle at the setting.
Sure. Yeah.
And then there's a screw you can turn. But sometimes we like to defer to the spacecraft guys, because they're the calibrators. But this is it's a click type, which I like. I think you have one that's not clicky.
No, mine is not clicky. It's this guy, which you can throw it across the room, and Young's modulus guarantees accuracy.
Well, and also what you have there is you don't have to zero that. With this one, with the spring in it, you got to unscrew it every time. You use it, unscrew it, then put it back in its case, and then it'll be accurate for a long time. If you leave the thing cranked to 99 pounds or something, well, it's not a good idea over the long term.
Well, this is 3/8 drive. Stuff on motorcycles is generally more like 3/8 drive country than it is 1/2-inch drive country.
Oh, absolutely.
1/2 is automotive.
Yeah.
1 inch is oil field.
Yep. 3/8 here is the same. And I was tempted to bring, I do have a 1/2-inch drive snap-on pneumatic impact gun.
Oh yeah.
And highly useful for those sort of it's more automotive. It's for those axle nuts. I have never the nut that holds the flange on the back of a transmission, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I have a 1989 Ford F-250. It's victorious on any rusty bolt. I mean, I'm not totally brutal. I'm not brutal with it, but we put some thread penetrant. Aerocroil is another tool that I love. Aerocroil is the penetrating the penetrating oil that was shared with me by Wheels Through Time. It was
Oh yeah.
everything that they pull out. They they soak it in Aerocoil first, the bores, and because they get all that ancient stuff down there. Dale Waxler was the principal there. Now the late Dale Waxler, but anyway, you put that 1/2 inch. I was tempted to bring it, but it is an awfully automotive piece. But it always wins. That's what I love about it.
Well, when we did that series of videos with the 600 Honda engine,
Oh yeah.
it had been together for a long time, and I went and bought myself an electric impact just for that. And as that's the way it feels, victorious, when you just go,
Yeah. Well,
and
yeah.
it's just because otherwise you're getting a piece of a sector gear and jamming it in someplace and hauling on it, and the engine crankcase is lifting up on the
Yeah.
bench if it's an engine only, and it makes you feel like an ape.
I was
It is
going to
not
start this off.
precise.
Yeah, I was going to start off with that. They always said use of tools is what separates us from the primates, but I don't think that's true.
No,
I've seen apes use tools, and so have I. Yeah,
with the punchline, get a bigger hammer.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The impact. Yeah, I have a 3/8 impact electric, and I use it a ton because it saves so much time, and it's very easy to control. And it's not over torquey. It's not a big powerful, like that 1/2 inch. You're not doing fine work with that. You're hammering the rusty trailer hitch
Yeah.
and trying to get that thing to come off the bumper or something. And you're just really hitting it. But with the 3/8, it's got a really fine control trigger, and you can go on an 8mm or 10mm and zip it open, get the thing out. And when you're reassembling something that has a lot of, say, a side cover, and you just want to zip them in, you can zip them in. And if you're, repeatable, you just zick, 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 zick. You can go opposite ways, and you just put a light torque that's pretty even all the way around. And then you can go in with your torque wrench, or, I have friends who are perhaps better mechanics than I, or more into the vibe. I don't know, but they don't use a torque wrench, and they kind of make fun of me for having like too many kinds of torque wrenches, all the way down to this Weehaw. It's a torque screwdriver, digital, and it comes with a ton of bits, so you can really kind of get into anything. But it also just takes a variety of bits. So there's no JIS in here, Japanese Industrial Standard, and that's why I have my Japanese Industrial Standard. If you don't know what that is, folks, most of your Japanese stuff, the thing that looks like a Phillips is not a Phillips. Yep.
No.
He's got even the same brand. And if you put a Phillips in it, you can sort of half-ass it and get it done, but you run a really good chance of wallowing out the beautiful, it's a vessel. And it has impact too, right? You hit it with a hammer if you need to.
Yeah, Vessel.
Yeah.
I first learned about the existence of that brand from their impact driver, which was marketed in the U.S. back in maybe the late 60s. And it came in a blue tin box. It was really very old-timey looking.
Yeah. We have one in the shop that
worked like crazy.
Exactly what you described. We have one in the World shop here.
The thing here is, for years, I used this, made by Crescent in Bridgeport, Connecticut.
Oh, nice.
And of course, Crescent has been bought by Apex and who knows what all. So that you don't know where things are made any longer. And I struggled with this for years, trying to keep it in Phillips screws so that it didn't cam out. And on occasion, when I would have to get something out and it wouldn't come out, I would put the whole assembly into the press, bring the press ram down until it touched this so that it could not cam out, and then victory.
Wow, get out, man. That's awesome. I got to keep that in mind.
Well, these things occur to you when you're struggling with something that isn't cooperating. That's the great thing. The great thing about tools is cats have tools, those claws that come out. They can run up a tree trunk, and sometimes we had a cat that would do that, and it would be up there 30 feet in the air. It would look down, goggle eyed, like, "Oh, how did I get here?" But tools enable you to do everything. It's wonderful to be able to just think to yourself, "Oh, third drawer, and there it is, whatever you're looking for." I used to carry a 50 power magnifier. I have, thanks to my youngest son, I received one last Christmas with a light and all that, but it was just wonderful because I could look through the slot in the connecting rod at the surface of the big end rollers and see if they were showing any pitting.
Oh, excellent.
And just a lovely thing.
Well, I have, my magnifier, my favorite magnifier, which I did not bring. This is a cup that was a gift to me from my brother, a 70 to 200 millimeter Canon lens, but it's actually just got water in it. It's not a lens, but the lens that I have the center element of a 70 to 200 that was faulty for the camera. It didn't work for the camera. It had an aberration in it.
Mm.
And you never see that. But that center element I got as parts back after I got my lens fixed. That is the single finest magnifying glass I have ever had.
Oh, wonderful.
It is so sharp and so precise. I have it in a little like velvet bag, and then you take it and you can you move it relative to your eye, relative to the surface, and you can just zero in. It's not molecular, man, but it's like what you're talking about. It just seems like you're peering into another world. It's just it's so good. And when you got to see, you got to see.
A few years ago, Bud Axlin, who was Kenny's first sponsor, Kenny Roberts' first sponsor, looked up from whatever he was doing, saw that I was standing there, and he said, "Have you noticed they're making the numbers on main jets smaller?" So you have to have this in your toolbox somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
Because it could be that you can stare at it, you carry it to the door, go out into the bright sun, and you're staring at it, and it won't give you the information. This will extract the information.
Well, here's the thing. So, I'm not young, but the way we do that now, Kevin, this is my other favorite tool. Is the camera, this phone, and the camera on this phone. I have 100 photographs of jets because
wonderful.
You take a picture and you can zoom in and you can see anything. Also, you can look where you can't normally see, like the back. You can stick it in behind the engine and turn the flash on and take a flash photo, or make a video with the light on and see where you can't see. I've done that on the back of my Ford F-250. There's an oil pressure. It's a 460 Ford, and there's an oil pressure sender back there. And you can't really, it's a big truck. You got to crawl over the engine. You can just reach in with this thing, take a picture, make a video, and see is it leaking? Is the wire not connected? Because I was, trying to figure that out. So this is my jet reader. And
excellent.
That's great. That Ducati back there. The Mikuni carbs on that thing, I had to rebuild those completely when I got it. And so I've got pictures of all the jets, and it's a nice record. Like I have it I know what the stock, I've got notes, I've written all that down, which reminds me of my high quality Tombow pencil for general writing. It's Tombow since 1913. It's beautiful quality wood. It's 2558B. And I have it's a 2-stage pencil sharpener for it. That's ridiculous, I know, but it's like $9. It's a German pencil sharpener, and you stick this thing in and you do the first one, which takes the wood back, and then you have a really long lead, and then you stick the lead in and you get this beautiful long fine point.
Yes.
I'll dig it out. You start talking about something else and I'll dig out the pencil sharpener.
Okay. Well, everything's tubeless today, but it wasn't always so. And for people who are restoring older machines, particularly those that have drilled spoke wheels with drilled rims, you still need an inner tube. And I watched a friend of mine who had bought a TD1C brand new in 1967 pinch 3 tubes in a row, one after the other. And he got so angry after the first one, and he got angrier and angrier. And eventually, later in life, he died of a heart attack. And I could see that it's not a good idea to let yourself become that angry. So I never used a tire iron that was longer than this. These are German Dauedat. I think Dauedat made toolkit stuff for Volkswagens and rather plebeian. But the nice thing about these was they're easy to control. If you feel like you need more leverage, that's telling you you
Yeah.
need more Ruglide, or you need to get the opposite side of the bead down into the well.
It absolutely shouldn't be a brutal operation.
No, it
Now,
should be slick.
there are a few exceptions. Years ago, we were doing a story that was $1,000, but no, this was $500 dirt bikes
Okay.
that we were taking on a ride. Jimmy Lewis was our off-road editor at the time, and I found a 1975 Honda MT250. So it looks like an Elsinore, but it's a dual sport 252
Yep.
stroke, and beautiful little bike. And I found it in Huntington Beach, and it needed tires, and I was trying not to spend any budget, so I was looking through the shop for tires, and I found this this Dunlop knobby, and that thing, I've never encountered any tire, particularly a knobby. The thing was like cast iron. I mean, it was the hardest carcass. And I've changed a lot of tires, and this was a brutal operation. I was using short irons because those long irons, you bend your rim with those things if you don't do it
Yeah.
right.
Yep.
I'm just not into the big leverage, just like you said. I finally got that thing on there, and I got it aired up. And Jimmy came out to the shop, and I said, "Yeah, man, I got the tires changed." He's like, "Oh, cool." And he looks at, and I said, "God, this tire was horrendous to get on the back." He's like, "Where did you get that tire?" In his very Jimmy Lewis way. And I'm like, "Well, it was in the other shop. I just found it there, and it was the right size. You can't use that tire." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm not taking that tire off, man. There's no way I'm taking that tire off." And Jimmy took it off, but it was like it was some special construction Dunlop, like desert racing tire for heavy bikes. It might've been for a GS or something, like at the time, because he was rally racing BMWs at Dakar. He was third place in Dakar on a twin one year. So I couldn't use that tire, but even that's the only time that it should be brutal is when you're using a specially constructed rally tire. So,
Well, my worst tire was a hardened up Dunlop triangular 275 18 front, which I mounted on a WM0 rim with those tire irons. And it was not easy. But when I finished and it held air, I was so happy. I was just delighted.
yeah, it's really nice when the bead snaps.
Yeah.
Air it up and just boom, boom. It's
Once
pretty
at
good.
Daytona, there was a man who came into I think he came into Goodyear, and he said, "I can't get the bead to seat on this. Can I use your air?" And they said, "Yeah, it's over there." So it was regulated to 60 psi, and he said, "It's not gonna do it. Can we turn it up at the compressor?" And they said, "It's a safety thing. We don't do over that pressure." So he went somewhere else. Bang! The whole thing exploded, and it tore a big hole in his wrist, and blood was squirting out. And John Jacobson, the late John Jacobson, who owned Boston Cycles in Boston and was responsible ultimately for the yellow and black paint scheme that Yamaha adopted, just was marvelous. He went over and grasped the guy's hand upstream from the wound and started directing people. "You go and get this. You make a phone call." And he's holding this thing, and the victim is kind of looking like, what's happening? What did I do? And it was marvelous. The fellow was patched up and went about his business. But that's something to remember, that if you're angry at a bead that won't seat, more Ruglide or water or whatever you like, and try again.
Yeah,
Because
sometimes you need a large volume of air too to blow the bead out. I've had tires that were stored by being wrapped
because yeah,
for tubeless.
banded.
Yeah.
Banding was a terrible thing. But when you use short irons like this, it tells you, if you're not being successful, it tells you to think again, because you're doing something wrong. Otherwise, you'd be able to mount those things. But unfortunately, we humans also are like the Old Testament God, vengeful and jealous. And we go to the tire store and get one of those tremendous tire irons. I'll fix the SOB. And like you said, they either blow a chunk out of their cast rim or they bend it. Or, like the gentleman in the anecdote, hurt themselves.
Yeah.
Not necessary.
Got my pencil sharpener.
Ooh.
Kum, made in Germany. 2 holes. Big hole does the wood. Next hole sharpens the point, and it's beautiful. And yeah, this and a yellow notepad. As much as I take notes on my phone, writing things,
Yeah,
I do a ton of that on notes and on my phone. But also having a big notepad and making sketches and keeping things organized that way is great. Of course, you can't beat, again, the phone for photographing wiring before you take it apart, or disarrange the wires.
absolutely.
Where
Yes.
do the washers go? Where do the spacers go? Take lots of pictures of stuff before you take it apart. Yeah, it's such a useful thing now. Sending film out. I mean, I do it for fun. I take film pictures for fun.
Yeah.
But man, you can't beat having that thing with you all the time. And
And
amazing.
whatever the artists may say, it's the new standard. And it used to be that surveillance photography from orbit was dropped in the form of film. It would come down on a parachute, and a C-130 with a special rig would fly past and snag it, and it would be hauled in. And now, of course, all that stuff is encrypted, and they beam it down.
Yeah. How many hammers do you have, Kevin?
Oh, well, at one point, I thought, I'm going to take a chance on these Chinese hammers because they look good. And when they arrived, they were good. They haven't worked loose. The handles have not worked loose from the heads. And they're regular old wood, which no doubt had to be imported into China from some place where wood grows. But hammer is for example, A1R was a disc valve motor, disc valve 2-stroke, and it had 2 cylinders, and there was a disc on either side of the crankshaft, and the carburetor stuck out the way our ears do. And that's why those bikes had bulges in the side of the fairing that were to accommodate the outward projecting carburetors. Well, those disc valves were mounted onto the crankshaft by means of little dowel pins. And they were a fairly close fit, so that sometimes they were really in there. And the only way to get them out was to take a 1-inch cutoff disc and cut a groove on either side of the projecting part, and then take hold of that with your diagonal cutters and lever it up. And it came out so sweetly. It was lovely. So for reinstalling the dowel pin, I've always treasured this 2-ounce ball peen because it's the right size for the job. And I found it useful for a lot of small, precise work that calls for tapping, not ramming and hammering. And people have hit this on stuff, so the wood is all splintered here, and it makes me sick. But still with me.
Yeah, this is a 4-ounce ball peen. The brand is Craftsman, but it's made by Vaughn. Has a hickory handle. The head is tight as can be. It's painted blue, so we know whose it is. And from across the room. And yeah, I have a 4-ounce for the same reason you have a 2-ounce, and I have a variety of other hammers like sheet metal hammers and big brutal, 2.5 pound, 5 pound sledges when you really got to get it done. But what you're talking about, it's the right size for the job. It's so important. And tapping versus destruction.
Yes.
There's a real difference in how you hit something and what the mass is behind it, what the feel is, what the swing is like, all of that. It makes a real difference. And when you want to break a taper,
oh yeah,
breaking a taper, you can do it brutally, I guess. A lot of people want to hit the end of the thing to get it out of the taper.
Yeah.
The thing that's protruding, the bolts or something, or the threads.
They don't screw a nut on it.
Yeah. So you put a nut on it, number one, preferably a nut you don't need. And you can do that. But also, I sometimes back it up. I have this egg dolly, which I use for sheet metal shaping, but I wish you could feel how heavy. This is a Martin egg dolly, and it's got all these little shapes. It's got a square shape. It's got this contour. It's got this contour. You can get it into places. If you hit the taper on the other, so you back it up with this and you hit the taper with a 4-ounce hammer. It doesn't have to be a big hammer.
Yeah.
Back and give it a good snap. It'll just drop out and you don't have to brutalize the threads.
Yeah.
And highly useful. This egg dolly, I mean, dense. Yeah, it's very, very useful. Just heavy as heck. I don't know, this is probably 4 pounds, 5 pounds.
I have disassembled many a customer motor whose crankshaft ignition end threads were crushed by that individual's desperation to get the rotor off. And the same thing with the clutch hub. And I don't think ill of those people because they're in a hurry. They're doing something that they're probably not fully familiar with, and they're taking action, which I'm all in favor of. I don't want to stand at the side of the road looking helpless. I want to do something and get moving. And but I've had the advantage of having a lot of experience with things like that, and those people are coming along. They're laying hands on the equipment, but they've hammered those threads because, like the mouse looking at the peanut butter on the trap treadle, they didn't think.
I got one. I just went out going out to the shop to get this stuff. I got the mouse that was doing horrible things to the equipment in there.
Oh yeah, I have a cat that chews through the wires on this computer setup. If I don't keep him out of here.
Just run a moderate voltage through those. It'll learn to stop.
That's right. I think I'm one of those people who thinks that the beauty of Snap-on is real. Now, there are a lot of people who regard it as a racket and may have tendencies in that direction because you're a young man trying to come up in the mechanical world and the Snap-on truck is out front. And you go out there and you think, well, it's only $400 for the things I want. And they're so nice. I mean, this big guy here, I love that. It's a nice shape and it is functional.
Yep. I was able to buy brand new in a roll about 20 years ago. I was able to buy the short set of British Standard Whitworth, basically. Yeah. and they're gorgeous. It has a BA 0, BA 1, and then it goes up in the Whitworth sizes to a fairly large, and they're nice and short.
Yeah.
I have the long ones too. I have a full set of Snap-on long Whitworth and some others. I don't have all Snap-on tools, but for those, I was able to acquire those. The sockets are very nice.
When I was at trackside, I carried only the tools, the fastener removing tools that fit the fasteners on the bike I was running, because I've seen so many guys that have a tremendous tall toolbox. Two men are having a gut buster trying to get it off the truck, and you pull open the drawers, oh, there's wood planes in there and spare parts for cars they haven't owned. But I like to have two of each, and in this case, these are 7 millimeters, and they're for tightening the jam nuts on cable adjusters, for making your throttle slides all take off at once. A pleasure.
Yeah, that's awesome. Also, not a whole lot of that going on these days with syncing your carburetors via the cables. But
well, they're racked. These were not racked carburetors.
Yep.
With a central. I saw at Monza one of the first batch of Gilera 500 racers that was built with the synchronization built into the carburetor rack, so that then you just ran a lift, an opening and closing cable to the throttle.
Yeah. And
that was a step. And of course, now we have throttle cables that are made out of copper, so that it conducts electrical signals that tell the computer, this is the torque I want. And then the computer kind of goes, well, we'll open the throttle this much, because our table of information gives us that information very, very quickly.
So a nice fitting wrench is a pleasure.
No question.
But when you're facing the rusty trailer hitch, and it's just a ball on the top, and you have your 1/2-inch Snap-on air gun and your air compressor up at 120 psi, and it just spins the ball in the bumper, and there's nothing to hold that.
Yeah.
That's when you get these locking pliers, and I won't use the brand, the other brand. We might call them Vice Grips. These are called Eagle Grip. They're made in USA. I don't think they're in production. They may still be in production. This is an LP10R, just means they're 10-inch. It's a Malco, DeWitt, Nebraska. I have never used locking pliers as positive as this. I put them on that trailer hitch and just, tightened it and got it to go over center.
Yeah.
And it didn't budge. And I had to hammer the daylights out of it to get that nut to come loose, because it's, it was like 1 1/8 or something, pretty big.
Yeah.
Just pop with that. And this thing held tight. And they work better. And you can do that. You can grip the daylights out of this thing, really, really squeeze it, get it to click over center just with all your might. And then when you go to release it, it just comes apart.
Because it's really close to center.
It's really easy. It's very positive, but also it's not hard to release.
Yeah.
Massively useful tool. And having the right, they're not cheap. I think I paid $50 for these, which is perhaps excessive. But what I've found is spending as much as you could afford often gives you the tool that actually works. And it's really true. Good fitting, like a Snap-on wrench, Matco. It's the difference between rounding a nut off or getting the nut off.
Yeah.
Because the socket fits properly, like a 6-sided socket that fits on the bolt that somebody else has kind of rounded off.
Yeah.
A 6-sided socket will grab it, grip it, and you get it out. You don't round it off more to where you got to cut it or drill it or do something,
And that's a
more.
good reason to have a few 6-side
Yeah.
in your box, because
And the best
you
you
may
can,
encounter that. Yeah.
the best you can get. Like I have tons of old Craftsman stuff that I bought because that's what I can afford. And there's all Harbor Freight has some pretty good stuff, but you will find, like I've seen pictures of broken sockets, when you're really hammering on something and
It splits.
it splits and it looks like,
Yeah.
wow, you look at, shouldn't be all those air bubbles in there, should there? So, yeah.
And of course, those are two worlds of mechanical competency. They're the people building engines in a controlled environment, not like the seashell dust that Daytona used to be blowing in the open areas. And then the other thing is the people who are not defeated by rust. They work on rusty old junk. They work on stuff that's been assembled for a long time, and they know how to just buzz through it. They're not going to stop and have to go, oh, well, what am I going to do now? Maybe I can. And when you have that experience, it means that whatever it is, you can get it going. And that's valuable, even though it seems crude and it seems to rely upon physical force or impact. Sometimes that's the medicine.
It is.
So
Drilling.
I have to respect both of those camps.
Absolutely. Yeah. Drilling the case and hitting it with a chisel to get the seized bolt out, you got to get it apart. You're not going to have progress unless it comes apart. How are you going to get it apart? Are you going to hit it with the torch? Or, I bought some components for that pickup truck, AC components, and you can't buy Motorcraft parts for an 89 Ford pretty much. I mean, there's some of them are out there, but none of the AC stuff. You can't buy a factory AC hose. So you go and you buy, whatever brand, and you find something I've found recently, particularly it's happening in motorcycles as well, older motorcycles. But automotive is even a better example, is like brake hoses. So I redid the brakes on the 89 Ford and I needed brake hoses.
Yeah.
And I went to giant online retailer, and there's a brand called Sunsong, and they're $5 for a rubber brake hose for the front rubber brake hose and the rear single on a 89 Ford F-250. $5 or $6. But then next to it is a Ray Bestis. I'm like, well, Ray Bestis, yeah, that's $8. I'm like, I think I'll go with the Ray Bestis. So I get the Ray Bestis. Then they come. So I buy the Ray Bestis and I open the package and it says Sunsong.
Yes.
So I paid $2 to $3 for it to be put into a Ray Bestis box. And then
wonderful.
Then I'm like, well, now I know. And I put the brake hose on the one side, and then I go to do the other one, and on the fitting that goes into the hard line, it's like a T. There's another fitting, but I don't have anything to go into it. There's nothing cut off. There's nothing missing. It's just as if it's the wrong brake hose. And now I'm in the middle of the job and I want to get it done. The brake hoses have different part numbers. They're within a fraction, like 1/8 of an inch in length. I'm like, I need a brake hose. So I call my local auto parts store with their house brand, best brake or whatever it is. And I go over to the auto parts store, and for $22, I get that box that says Ultimate Best Brake Parts, Auto Parts Store brand. And I open the box for $22, and it's a Sunsong brake line. So there's one factory that everybody is repackaging from, and
all these marketing outlets. Yeah.
And to top it off, the copper washers that come in, I measure, and they're too thin for the caliper. So there's a recess in the caliper, a fine recess. It's like a fraction of a millimeter that's supposed to hold that washer. The washers that they put in that package are so thin that the banjo doesn't work. It just leaks out. So then I have to get my whole box of copper washers out and find something appropriate to put and then anneal them and do, and that's what I use this for, is measuring the washer. Like, well, you take the used washer is twice the thickness of the one, and they're just saving money because it uses less copper to make this really thin washer, but it doesn't work. And I told giant online retailer, hey, these washes are wrong. They're like, oh, well, look into it. We've never heard of that before. And then I'm standing there at the auto parts store, and this is like the hub store. This is the big store in the area, and it's Southern California, so it's got a pretty big warehouse. And these are the guys who are dealing with the shops that are all around. That's why I go there, because they have more stuff. They're more likely to have it in stock. They'll work with you. You can go in the back and look at pipe fittings, or like, I think we have something over here. And then you can just look at the parts, and they're very cool about it. But I stood there and I said, these washers in this package are too thin. They will not work. He's like, uh-huh. I'm like, you need to tell somebody, you know, and they're like, uh-huh. And it's just how it is. It's not a tool, but it's solving problems is what we're trying to do.
I needed a hydraulic hose for the tractor, and the local outlet, oh, we don't have any in stock. So internet, well, it wasn't encouraging. So I called the place where I'd bought tractor stuff before, and I told the lady who runs it my problem, and she said, we don't stock anything. We make all that stuff. Bring it down here. We'll make you one. Bingo.
Yeah, great.
Well, I thought it was wonderful.
Yeah, the AC, I redid the whole AC system, and you get it, you just get it from one of many brands, and then you find that everyone's selling the same condenser.
Yeah.
The photo of the condenser is identical, but there's like 4 brands selling them. So you just, I just bought that condenser, but the hose, the low pressure return, after it goes through the evaporator and it goes across the engine bay and back into the compressor, it had the wrong bend in it. It had, it was like a 170-degree bend, and it needed to be more like 120.
Yeah.
So I'm happily putting all this stuff together. I'm like, new air conditioning. I'm going to charge it up, and snowflakes are going to come out of the vents. And I'm like, God, that looks really high. And the bend was just too straight, and you couldn't close the hood.
Yeah.
So then I got to take the stuff off, and I didn't bring my oxyacetylene torch in, but having a torch, like fire, when you really got to get some stuff done, or you need to heat up the part, a rosebud, you want to drop that bearing in without brutality, heating up the place that's receiving it and freezing the bearing. Like the fancy guys use like liquid nitrogen.
Yeah.
Like you look at, one of my heroes is Gary Braun. He had a company called Retrodyne, and he was out there doing what you were doing. It was like hammering pipes and making these 2-stroke cones and design. And so shout out to you, Gary. He's working at Millennium, and he's the frozen bearing guy, and it just drops in. It's amazing. Anyway, I got the torch out. I took that thing down to the shop, got the torch out. My oxygen regulator failed, and I had to borrow one, but I put it together. I got it. I heated up the part and just scooched it. And I'm like, we better try that. Don't want to go too far. Don't want to kink it. And took it back up. Wasn't enough. Brought it back and then heated it up in a slightly different area to put more of a curve on it.
Yeah.
And away we went. And now we got snowflakes coming out of the AC. But that's like parts up. That's what you're buying off the shelf. It's very challenging. The parts can make, on vintage stuff where you can't go to a dealer, half the challenge is finding quality parts. Like, I am here to tell you, carburetor parts off of eBay, probably not what you want to do unless it's your only choice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we gave a shout out to Sudco recently after I was fixing my Mikunis on my Ducati, and Sudco has gone out of business.
Yeah, isn't that a crisis?
And it's, man, you could rely on Sudco for quality parts, Keen and Mikuni in particular, and you got the right O-rings. And they're not standard O-rings a lot of times, and they're made out of good stuff that's like resistant to problems. And they're 1.2 millimeter by whatever, they're very specific sizes. And now we're trying to find like who's the Keen person and who's the Mikuni person. And
well, this is life in the post-industrial era.
It is. Well, I'm going to pull. Oh, you got one?
No, it's just that our toolboxes are museums now.
Not entirely. I mean, we still use this punch here. This is a motion.
Good.
We could do an entire program on Motion Pro. I thank them for these because this has a replaceable brass tip.
Yep.
And you can you don't mess up your collars on your shocks when you're doing your adjustable preload. It's nice and long. You can get in there. You can change this tip as it wears out, and you can tap, 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 and get your collars loose and set your preload. I did this with my son on the Ducati sitting back there. We cranked up the ride height, because I'm large and he's pretty large for an 11-year-old and loves riding on the back. So we put it at the upper range of the recommended rear spring preload. So I love that. This is a really nice tool for the shock punch. It's 08-0483. There you go. My other favorite Motion Pro tool I bought new in 1986 when I had my RD400 Daytona Special, and I wanted to synchronize the carburetors. And it wasn't like my old SUs or my Strombergs on my Triumph TR6 where you just stuck this like airflow meter on the face of the carburetor. You could do this with vacuum. So I have
and here it comes.
They call it carb sticks. It's a manometer. And I bought this yellow beauty with these nice rubber hoses. And like I said, about 1986. And inside of here, folks, real mercury. And I feel proud that all the mercury is still there, that I didn't make a toxic cloud out the tailpipe. Because if you rev the bike up too much and shut the throttle, you get an incredibly high vacuum condition, and you can pull the mercury all the way up, and then you get this misty silver death cloud out the tailpipe, which is why they probably don't sell this anymore.
Yeah,
you have to use I think they use ATF or something in the new ones, and you have to kind of calibrate them every time you use it. Calibrated since 1986, folks, and I still have all the mercury. So I did my RD, and I think the lesson with this is part of my my thing for measurement is they always tell you like, oh, well, stick a drill bit in the bottom of the carburetor and adjust the idle screw until it kisses the drill bit.
Yep.
And then you're synchronized, and just take it from there. And I did that on my Norton Commando. I did that with my new Amel Premiers that I put on there, and done it on many multi-carburetor bikes. And I'm like, oh yeah, listen to the hiss, various ways. Oh, we'll just we'll put the drill bit in and we'll turn the screw the same amount. And I'm like, you know what? I got to find out. I'm going to synchronize these carburetors without using this tool to the best of my ability. And I thought, okay, I'm good. I've nailed this. I did my drill bits. I did all of that stuff. I did my cable, because the Norton is a cable sync. You're synchronizing the throttle slides by adjusting basically the length of the cable. I did all of that work to the best of my ability. I'm like, I know that I nailed this. I'm going to be within, a centimeter, a millimeter. And I put those carb sticks on, and it was so far out. And I rode it, got used to it. I'm like, oh, it seems to be running pretty good. And then I actually synchronized it with that tool, and it was exquisitely smoother.
Yeah.
And just better running. And for me, that's the importance of measurement. And that's what I found is going through all of this stuff. I mean, this is my Craftsman sweep dial indicator for the lathe, and it's a little follower,
setup indicator. Yeah.
Setup. Yep. And it's, it's a 1 thou.
Yeah.
1 thou. You set up the head of your lathe, make sure your lathe is good, or you're putting, your 4-jaw chuck setting, you can set it wherever you want, right? 4-jaw, you can
absolutely,
just move around. And it's way fussier than a 3-jaw, but I'm not in production. I'm in the accuracy business. And so getting that shaft in a 4-jaw chuck is the way to go, because then you can set it up for 0. So
in the olden days, one of the things that the shop superintendent did was to grind the jaws on the 3 jaws for concentricity every little while. I remember seeing this older gentleman doing this in a shop that I was using. Which brings me to the subject of shared tools. I worked for one of those organizations that was publicly funded, and we made scientific sort of teaching movies about fluid flow, and that was fascinating. But they tried to have a shared tool board in the shop, and the people who actually worked in the shop, of course, had their own tools, and they were locked up at night. But when the tools went up on the board, they were all gone in a week. And so one of us decided that he would go and buy 144, a gross, of number 2 plain blade screwdrivers. And he said, I'm going to test my theories. One theory is that as soon as everybody has stolen enough screwdrivers, he's got one in each car, one down at the Cape and one at the house, the thieving will stop. All 144 screwdrivers disappeared because it became screwdriver central. Oh, I need a screwdriver. I'll just fall by the shop and get one. Some of those people probably had 10 of them. It was wonderful.
Well, this reminds me, I have a screwdriver. I've talked about it on the show before, but I have a screwdriver, a specific screwdriver that I had brutalized and broken. And so it was just like, what was it? It was sort of a chisel, but not, because the edge wasn't straight. And then I was struggling getting jets out of a carburetor years ago. And I thought, I don't have a screwdriver that fits into the hole, and then fits into the slot perfectly. So what I did is I took a brand new Mikuni pilot jet and I ground my screwdriver until it fit the pilot jet perfectly, and it had really sharp square edges.
Yes.
And that, even when someone else has just brutalized the jet before you got it,
Yep.
a lot of times you can get it out because it fits and it has those sharp edges to really bite. So folks, if you are doing the ridiculous thing of working with actual brass jets, do yourself a favor and make yourself a screwdriver that actually fits. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be, made of some unassailable high nickel alloy. It just needs to fit really, really well.
I did exactly what you described, and that tool is still in my toolbox.
Yeah.
As if time were about to run backwards, and I would be once more confronted with Mikuni idle jets.
Yeah. On the other end of the spectrum, dealing with electronic fuel injection and weird tuning and doing stuff, I have this huge, what is this? Probably a 6-inch gauge. This is a master gauge type 100-3 316 stainless tube, Marsh Instrument Company. It's in 1 pound increments, PSI.
Yeah.
0 to 100. I took it down to the hose shop where you were getting your custom hoses made, and I had a variety. I've got many different hoses and many different fittings so that I can get it plumbed in. I got a bunch of different size T's, and I can plumb it into an electronic fuel injection system and measure the fuel pressure while running, turning the key on. Does it go to the proper pressure, and does it leak down? Because the pressure should be static, but if you have a leaky injector, it'll go 50 psi and it'll start to dribble away.
Yeah.
Leading to hard starting.
Yes.
And this was I got this off one of those auction sites many, many years ago, used. I wasn't sure if it was accurate, but I loved it anyway. I thought, well, I'll just hang it on the wall. It's just beautiful. I mean, the graphics and everything. And I hooked it up to my bicycle pump, which is a very fancy, accurate digital bicycle pump, to the tenth of a pound, 10th of a psi, and I pumped it up, and it's dead nuts. 50 psi is 50 psi, so it's been a really useful tool all these years. I don't know. There's more. Do you have more? I have more. We could go on.
I'm through here. I've exhausted the one thing, the gasket scraper.
That's awesome.
It's best tackle those jobs in the warm sunlight of an afternoon, and you have your thoughts to yourself, and you're being careful not to scratch, and pretty soon you have that aspect of the cases you're working on ready for reassembly.
Well,
after degreasing.
Yeah, this reminds me of one of the greatest tools is experience, because long ago I brought an RD 350 motor to your shop in Massachusetts, all the way from California, and you were over there gonna port the cylinder, and I was on the other side of the shop, and I was chasing threads, and you asked me, "What are you doing?" Kind of curious, and I said, "Well, I'm chasing the threads because I like them to be smooth." And you kind of said, "Oh, okay." You were satisfied with that. because you like things to come apart easily the same way that I
Yeah.
do. And I felt proud of that because, I'd satisfied Kevin Cameron in some small way in his own shop. And we're working on rebuilding that engine. And the next thing was the cases are apart and I'm cleaning the 3-bond off with a razor blade. I'm scraping.
Yeah.
And you're just over there doing your thing. You're like, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm getting this, the 3-bond, or it was Yama bond. It's just the gray gooey stuff that you put the case, that you glue. 1104, folks. That's the stuff I like the best. And 3-bond 1104. And Kevin says, if you put some lacquer thinner on a rag, that'll wipe right off. I'm like, oh, and sure enough, as if by magic, no more brutal scraping, just wipe it away. And that's,
Wipe it away.
Wipe it away. Having, I don't know, it's apprenticeship in some ways, having somebody who's really done a lot of things to work with you to help you along the way. I found that incredibly useful. Just little things like that. All right. I'm going to just talk about my solder sucker. Vampire Tool solder sucker made in Japan. This is a beauty. So when you're soldering on boards and stuff in particular, but when you want to get the solder off, this is the tool. So you hit it, it locks in position like this. You take your soldering iron for whatever you're doing, not too hot, just hot enough because you don't want to melt the whole board off. And you got your hole and you want to put a new capacitor in your EFI, brain or whatever it is you're doing. And you get it, you heat it up, and then you hit the side button and it makes suction. And this is a silicone tip and you just mash it on there and it cleans the joint so you can start fresh. Solder sucker. Love it. Oh, what else? I think the infrared thermometer.
Got to have it.
Well, gosh, you're not measuring tire temperature, but you can measure the track temperature. You can measure the surface temperature of the tire, which isn't really the number that's important. That's why the fancy tire guys have a probe with a needle on it almost that they can get in and really actually measure down by the carcass what's going on. That's important. But man, this thing, multi-cylinder engines, how hot are the exhaust pipes? Are they evenly temperatured across like at idle, or you can just learn a lot by the temperature. It's nice.
Sure.
It's nice to have. And then
this morning in Indonesia, the track temperature was like 57 centigrade.
Oh my.
Yeah, right up there. Multiply 57 times 1.8 and add 32, and you're there with Fahrenheit. But the riders seem to be okay with it. It's not, people aren't burning up.
Oh, good. I was going to say, take it easy, greasy. That's what Kevin Schwartz used to say occasionally on press launches. I'll go with the he would show up for Suzuki. He was on the GSXR 600 and 750 launch at Phillip Island hanging out with us. My last two items, I think, are electrical. One is a low cost analog multimeter with all your ohms and volts and everything. And the reason I like analog is because I have a digital one of these things, a Fluke. It's not actually a Fluke. It was the Craftsman copy. I mean, Fluke made them for Craftsman.
Yeah.
And I love that accuracy, but a lot of times in the stuff that I'm dealing with, all I need to see is like, does the needle move? And how high does the needle go? Is it around? I don't need to know if it's 12.76595 volts. I just need to know that it's around 13. Awesome. We're in good shape. It stays steady when I rev it. It doesn't go to 17 like my RD 350. Why is it breaking up at high RPM? Because the coils can't tolerate 21 volts because the voltage regulator broke. Mechanical, by the way. And then a chintzy test light. Now I have a better test light, but I like using my chintzy one because I don't care if it melts, And
Consumable tool.
It is nice to have more of a bulb because this is kind of a tiny bulb. That's what's good about the big ones is the bulb actually has a bit of a load. And so you can see it has more wattage. You can put a higher watt bulb in it. And then you can see like, oh, look, it's kind of dim. Why is that so dim? Because if you go from pole to pole on the battery, it's bright as day. So, this is not good. Trailer lights, like you know, trailer wiring is usually 11 volts,
Ugh.
or 11 volts by the time it gets to your bumper.
Yeah,
Cause
right.
you know, that's why LED lights on trailers are kind of nice, because they make the same amount of lumens with 11 volts going in, or, you know, 13.7. They don't care that much. So,
No, they need their minimum, and above that is just,
and they're just bright as heck. And
yeah.
that's why instead of the $2 trailer taillight, you can buy it, you know, the trailer section at your Napa in Salinas, California, or wherever you live. You pay $80 for the LED ones because they last presumably forever and they're bright.
I
Okay.
used to carry this with me trackside because with the slide rule, you can see every combination of numbers, front sprocket, rear sprocket, that produces the ratio you want, and you can
Oh,
pick
wow.
one. And never does the battery go dead.
Yeah, slide rules are pretty neat. I have my dad's slide rule, and what an interesting and fun tool. And of course, now you just talk in your phone and say, what is 1/8, or what's the ratio of 13 to 42?
Yeah.
You can do all that, but as it is with the internet, sometimes the signal to noise ratio is bad, and sometimes it doesn't tell the truth. Sometimes people out there are doing the wrong thing and putting the wrong information out there and telling you things that aren't true.
People used to say to me, they wouldn't let them say it if it wasn't true. Yes, let's police the internet. There's a job.
Yeah. Well, we hope we've done something for the signal to noise ratio. I'll just show my angle measurement indicator thing. Love this guy too, made out of stainless, super accurate. Highly useful. It goes along with, actually, here it is, my Mini Mag Plus Fowler electronic protractor. Has magnets. Turn it on, and you can turn it, and it gives you the number. Turn it, gives you the number. You can zero it, so even if in the grand universe there is 0 degrees versus gravity, you can put it on the table that you're working on and zero it to the table, and then you know that the table is the truth. Or you can put it on the table that the motorcycle is mounted to and make that the 0, and then you can measure the fork tube angle and say, like, oh, okay, we know what the rake is. So here we go. I could talk about tools all day, but I'd rather go use them.
Yes.
Well,
and we have.
Yeah. My favorite tools, how to use them. We didn't really talk about, we're way over time. I wanted to talk about torque values and how you can ballpark the torque value by the shank of the bolt and the material it's made of, and you can get a good idea of what the torque should be. There's usually a torque value in your manual. Look it up.
Yes, there is.
A lot of times I write it on a pen next to the thing, just like on my trailer in silver pen on the fender. It says TP, tire pressure 60. And I know for sure that it should be 60, and it keeps me from being lazy because it says tire pressure should be 60. Do I know if it's 60? I better find out.
Yeah. Summers Brothers had a troublesome customer who kept breaking their lovely bolts. And I think they were axle bolts. And finally, they sent a company representative around to the guy's shop and said, we'd like you to show us the procedure you use for torquing these bolts. The guy gets out the torque wrench. It's a very nice, modern, just got a certificate of calibration, all the good things. Swings them in steps. Everything is nice. The guy takes a breaker bar and another quarter turn. And of course, the representative is drawing back and wincing. What are you doing? I said, oh, I don't want him to come loose, do I? What are the torque specifications for? Does this person understand that materials have a yield point beyond which It is not elastic. It
Yeah, you've
doesn't go
already
back
straight.
to the original.
Usually the torque value has already given you exactly the amount of stretch that you need,
Stretch.
and it will
Yep.
recover. There are some bolts that stretch, and then you got to use a new bolt. That's how it works. But
Yep.
there are the others where they stretch, and then you would loosen them, and they will stretch again.
TTY, torque to yield.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about there. I think Mercedes may have started that.
Oh boy, Germans.
But the guy was, perfectly transparent about it. Well, he said, I don't want it to come loose.
Yeah, my friend Ray worked at a car dealership and early in his mechanicking career, and he was in there, and there was a guy whipping away with an air gun on lug nuts, and he broke the bolt, and he's like, God, I thought these things stopped by themselves. He's winging it with an impact. I thought I guess they did stop by themselves, didn't they?
Well, like the guy
Eventually.
that set the cruise control on his motorhome and went in the back to make a sandwich.
Maybe someday. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for listening, folks. We appreciate the attention and spending the time with us. We've got a lot of podcasts out in the back catalog now. We're getting close to 40. We'll hit 50, I think, by the end of the year. We got a special one in mind for the 50th. We'll let you know about that coming up. This podcast, like the others, is brought to you by Octane Lending, our parent company. There's a link to Prequal Flex. You can check it out. You can see a no impact credit pull, and you can shop for bikes and shop by price or shop by model. See what you can get. Helps us out if you click the link and check it out. And or particularly if you want to go buy a bike, use Octane. We appreciate your time, and we'll see you down in the comments. Thanks for listening.
Yep.